when my family moved to the secluded lakeside cottage. I never could have imagined that I would stumble upon something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't the isolation that made me uneasy, nor the relentless winds that howled through the trees at night. It was a lake, with its dark waters and the walls of the old cottage, which seemed to whisper secrets, hiding something much more sinister. It was during my first few weeks in this quiet, almost forgotten place that I found the journal, a weathered, yellow book hidden in the wall panel of the attic. I was 17, full of curiosity and a sense of adventure, traits that, in hindsight, proved to be my undoing. The cottage was old, creaking under the weight of decades of abandonment. Its walls seemed to have absorbed the sorrow and suffering of all the years that had been left to decay. There was a strange heaviness in the air, especially in the attic. It was as though the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I was up there one afternoon, rifling through dusty boxes and broken furniture, when I found it. The journal. It was wedged behind a loose panel in the corner of the attic, as if it had been deliberately hidden away. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. It belonged to a girl named Clara, and her story was as unsettling as it was tragic. The journal was filled with strange entries, cryptic, haunting, and increasingly frantic as I read further. Clara spoke of a presence that lingered in the cottage, something that whispered to her in the dead of night. She wrote about the rules, the ones that should never be broken. But the most chilling part was when she detailed her attempt to contact the spirit of the cottage, the force that haunted it. She had used a pendulum, the very same tool that I had once seen my grandmother use in her own occult practices, though I had always thought it was just a harmless curiosity. Clara's entry about the seance described her desire to reach out to the spirits in the hope of finding answers, but instead, something terrible happened. She had summoned something dark, something malicious, and, as the final words of the journal said, the rules were broken, and now we must pay. I couldn't help but feel a shiver creep down my spine as I closed the journal, suddenly aware of the oppressive silence around me. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the house itself was reacting to my discovery. I didn't know what to make of it, but my curiosity was piqued. I had to know more. I took the journal downstairs, where my cousins Mia and Ethan were visiting for the weekend. They were just as curious as I was about the old cottage, but unlike me, they were eager to explore in ways that were a bit less rational. That night, after dinner, the storm came. The wind howled through the trees outside, rattling the windows. I suggested we do something fun to pass the time, and that's when I shared the journal with them. Mia, always the more daring of the two, was immediately intrigued by Clara's entries. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed skeptical, rolling his eyes at the idea of an old, haunted cottage. Still, they both agreed to indulge me. We decided to try the seance that Clara had written about, using the pendulum she described. We gathered in the attic, the only room in the house that still had some sense of mystery to it. We lit lanterns, their flickering flames casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The storm outside raged, but it only added to the eerie atmosphere, making the house feel even more alive. Mia held the pendulum, and we each took our place around the makeshift circle. We followed the instructions in the journal carefully, calling out to Clara, asking if her spirit was present. At first, nothing happened. The pendulum hung motionless, swaying gently in the air. But then, suddenly, it began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as if an unseen hand was guiding it. We were all transfixed, and I could see that even Ethan was starting to take the whole thing a little more seriously. The pendulum swung wildly back and forth, and before I knew it, it began spelling out a message. Leave. The word hung in the air like a threat, the single word pulsating in the dim light. I laughed, dismissing it as a trick. Mia, you're moving it, I said, though I could see the fear in her eyes. This is just a prank, right? But Mia insisted she wasn't touching it. The pendulum swung again, this time with force I couldn't explain. The lanterns flickered violently, casting the room into strange, erratic shadows. The temperature in the attic dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in the air. There was a moment of silence, a heavy pause where the world seemed to hold its breath. And then the lanterns all went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I could feel the weight of something unseen pressing in on us. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but deliberate, pacing around us in the dark. I felt my heart race as I turned to Mia and Ethan, but they were just as terrified as I was. We all stood frozen, the darkness so thick it felt suffocating. The footsteps grew louder, and a cold, unnerving whisper filled the air. It was Clara's voice, faint but unmistakable. You broke the rules. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. My skin crawled as the whisper echoed in my ears, repeating the same chilling words over and over. You broke the rules. In a panic, I reached the door, but it wouldn't open. I tugged at the handle, but it was as though it was locked from the other side. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until I could feel them all around me. The lanterns shattered, their glass shattering in the dark, plunging us deeper into nightmarish shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, desperate for any sign of escape. Suddenly, the door to the attic flew open, and we scrambled for the exit. The air was so thick with fear that I could hardly breathe, but we made it down the stairs and out into the storm. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the cottage, bruised and shaken, drenched in the rain. We never spoke of what happened that night, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was following us. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Clara's voice, soft and pleading, asking, "Why didn't you listen?" I left the journal behind, thinking it was best to forget what had happened, but the memories clung to me like a shadow. Months later, I learned the tragic history of the cottage. Clara had been a young girl who lived there decades ago, accused of witchcraft by the townspeople. She had been burned alive in the very yard where the cottage now stood, her cries for mercy swallowed by the flames. Her soul had never found peace, and her curse had lingered, waiting for someone like me to break the rules. Now every night, I hear her voice, and I wonder if it's too late to make things right. I never expected our visit to Harrington Manor to change my life, to shatter my understanding of what's real and what's not. Mark, my brother, had always been the adventurous one between us. Sophie, our friend and folklore enthusiast, was fascinated by the manor's reputation. The old house, with its crumbling stone walls and haunted past, stood on the outskirts of a small rural town in England. The locals whispered about it. Stories of fire, a lost child, and a nanny who had been blamed for something unspeakable. The manor, abandoned for years, became a magnet for the curious, and that's how we ended up here. It was Mark who suggested we go. Of course, it was Sophie, with her collection of ghost hunting tools, brought a spirit radio. It was one of those gadgets that supposedly let you hear the voices of the dead. As much as I trusted Sophie, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were tampering with something we didn't understand. But curiosity got the best of me. The manor loomed over us as we approached. The grandiose structure was now decaying, the windows dark and broken, the ivy crawling up the sides like some living entity, trying to reclaim what had once been a home. We stepped through the creaking gates, which groaned in protest, and into the shadow of the house. It was eerily quiet, too quiet for a place that was rumored to be haunted. The floorboards creaked under our weight as we entered through the rotting front door. I could smell the musty scent of damp wood and the faint undertones of something long dead. Sophie was already setting up the spirit radio in the entryway. "Let's see if we can communicate with the past," she said, a grin spreading across her face. Mark nudged me. "Come on, Laura. Don't be such a skeptic." I rolled my eyes but followed them through the house. Sophie turned on the radio, and static filled the air. At first, it was just white noise. Then, something changed. The static deepened, became thicker, as if something or someone was trying to break through. "Did you hear that?" Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with excitement. I strained my ears, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard something faint but clear, a child's voice, soft and distant. Mark chuckled, probably just interference. But Sophie's eyes locked on the radio. She wasn't laughing. No, that wasn't interference. We continued exploring, moving through the rooms with their decaying wallpaper and shattered chandeliers. Each room seemed to tell a different story. Old furniture covered in dust, mirrors cracked and reflecting only darkness, bookshelves full of books that hadn't been touched in years. But it was the nursery that caught our attention. We found it by accident. Mark, ever the curious one, pushed a hidden panel in the wall while looking for another way to the upper floor. It opened with a creak, revealing a darkened hallway that led to a small, forgotten room, a nursery, though its purpose was long lost to time. Inside, the air was thick with dust. A single rocking chair sat in the center, its old wood scratched and worn. Sophie stepped forward, holding the radio. "This is it," she said, her voice hushed. "Let's see who's still here." As soon as the radio crackled to life, the sound shifted, the static deepened again, but this time, something different pierced through, the soft, sorrowful cry of a child. It was almost inaudible, like a whisper lost in time. "Margaret," the voice whispered, barely a breath. "Leave now." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The voice sounded so real, so clear. I turned to Sophie, but her eyes were wide with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe? She reached out for the radio, but before she could adjust it, the cries grew louder, more urgent. "Leave now!" The voice shouted this time, a wave of panic crashing over us. Then, in the silence that followed, I heard it, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. The unmistakable creak of a rocking chair moving. Mark looked at me, his face pale. What the hell was that? We all turned toward the hallway, toward the sound. The rocking chair in the nursery was moving by itself, slowly rocking back and forth, creaking with each movement. Sophie clutched the radio tighter, but the whispers kept growing. "Leave now. You don't belong here." Before any of us could react, Sophie staggered backward, her eyes rolling into the back of her head. She collapsed, her body crumpling like a rag doll. Mark and I rushed to her side, but as I looked down at her pale, lifeless face, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Something cold, something angry. I looked up just in time to see the translucent figure of a young girl standing in the doorway. She was pale, her hair tangled and long, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed toward the nursery door, her fingers trembling as if trying to warn us. "Margaret?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The girl didn't respond. She simply stood there, her figure flickering like a dying light, before vanishing into the air as though she had never been there at all. "Laura, we need to get out of here," Mark shouted, his voice urgent. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We helped Sophie to her feet, but she was unresponsive, her body limp in our arms. It was as if she had forgotten what had just happened. She couldn't remember collapsing, couldn't remember the whispers or the ghostly figure. We stumbled out of the manor as quickly as we could, barely able to breathe in the stale air. Once outside, I tried to calm Sophie, but she kept insisting that everything was fine. "It was just a bad dream," she muttered. But I knew it wasn't. Something had followed us. Days later, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that had been waiting for us. I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret, the child and the whispers. I went back to the town to search through old records, hoping for answers. What I found sent chills down my spine. Margaret had died in a fire, trapped inside the manor's nursery. The nanny, who had been responsible for her care, was blamed for the tragedy. They said she had been careless with the fire, that she had been negligent. But there were whispers, rumors, of something darker, of a curse, of a spirit seeking vengeance. The nanny had survived the fire, but her name was forever tainted by the tragedy. She was cast out, her reputation ruined, and Margaret's spirit, lost and angry, had been left to wander the halls of the manor. The whispers, I realized, were her warnings. We had triggered something ancient and vengeful. But what terrified me most was what I discovered next. Sophie had dreamed of the fire. In her dream, she saw the child, trapped and screaming for help. She saw the flames. She saw the nanny. And she saw the child so forever lost. Sophie didn't remember what happened in the manor. But the dream had left her shaken, her mind haunted by the same child's cries we had heard. It was as though the past had come to find us, as though we had awakened something that had been lying dormant for so long. And now, I wasn't sure if we were still being haunted by the ghost of Margaret or by the guilt of disturbing her restless spirit.